You're listening to Blossoming Technologist, a podcast for young professionals in tech discovering skills, careers, and tips for being in the tech industry. I'm your host, Marisa, and today we're joined by Chase Kocher, the founder and CEO of Aim for Hire, a boutique tech recruiting firm based in Austin, Texas. Aim for Hire partners with hyper-growth tech companies to recruit tech talent in Austin and for fully remote positions. 3.5 years ago, Chase started his company alongside his brother Jake to help smaller companies compete for top talent. Chase is here to talk about why candidates should consider working at startups, how that interview process is different from bigger companies, and advice for current job seekers. Chase, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. As always, the first question I ask, what first got you interested in the tech industry?
It's a good one. To be honest, it's honestly because I just didn't understand technology. I was a lifelong basketball player. Really, my sole focus was occasional school and lots of sports. And coming out of college, I kind of had to redefine, what my identity was going to be, what my passion was going to be. I wasn't going to be a pro basketball player, so that was pretty evident. So it was time to kind of find something new and honestly something that kind of almost scared me a bit, but also like I saw there was just all this disruption and new things coming out. And I maybe as a millennial, but the idea of new and crazy, disruptive, exciting was like what I was all about. So that's really what drew me into the tech space kind of right off the bat.
Cool. And you got your start in tech recruitment, is that right?
That's correct. And I really just kind of fell into it. It's, recruiting firms, especially in the States, I think I guess their growth, their expansion has really been, fairly significant over the last 10 to 20 years, just with the demand, especially around tech and product talent and the growth of that industry, in the US. So I think overall, it was kind of one of those things where I was interviewing software companies for sales type roles and then had this opportunity to go into recruiting and do recruiting and sales. So the idea of wearing multiple hats was exciting to me. So I just kind of jumped all over it.
Yeah, super cool. So what then inspired you to start Aim for Hire?
The underdog story, frankly, is something that, growing up, I was just always a huge fan of that. My dad, in a lot of ways, nurtured that. My brother and I have, for one, being competitive, but we played college basketball. We ended up all playing college basketball, but we were all kind of undersized, doubted by a lot of people, didn't really, have everyone's confidence in our abilities. So I think we kind of grew up with that chip on our shoulder. And, that really kind of led to eventually when I got into the workforce, each time I'd leave a company and trying to kind of move up into a new role or a bigger role, there's always that doubt, people's doubt or concern that, you're making the wrong decision or they don't really have faith in that you can go do this bigger role. And to me, that was just a driver. So in a lot of ways, all of that kind of stemmed into eventually wanting to start our own firm. But, going along with the underdog story mentality, the clients that we work with at Aim for Hire are very, they're smaller. They're anywhere from 20 to a couple hundred employees. They're trying to disrupt, some industry, mostly in the B2B software space. And that they're exciting, they're picky, they're selective, they're doing some interesting things. But I just saw from working in the recruiting space for 4 years prior to this that, a lot of recruiting companies don't like working with smaller companies just because it's less replicable of a business model. Like I said, they're fairly selective on who they hire. They don't often have as much money as Google or Facebook does to pay their recruiting, teams and partners. So that was kind of an area where I identified just I'm passionate about fighting for the little guy and getting to work with companies that also are fighting against Facebook and Amazon and all the big players for talent. It just went hand in hand with kind of how my brother and I were raised. So I know that was a long answer, but the short answer would be the whole underdog mentality is certainly the driver.
Yeah, I love that. So for these companies, you said that, often they don't necessarily want to partner with recruiting firms because they are so small. What do you think is the benefit to them with partnering with Aim for Hire?
Yeah, the smaller companies, depending on their stage, some of them will have, their own recruiting team. Others, maybe they haven't gotten to that point where they've hired out, their own HR department, their own recruiting department. So the thing that we found, enjoyable is that in some cases we get to come in and kind of help them establish what that process is. And it's mutually beneficial because, we have a process of our own. And if we can kind of partner with the company and really mold something that helps both sides, like that's kind of a best case scenario for us. So I think that's where the smaller companies, while like there's more ambiguity around like, this person just talked to Jimmy and now he's got to go talk to Jennifer and now he's got to interview with Dave. And like, the smaller companies, like almost everybody interviews them. So I think, it's hard to kind of get a little more of a concrete, like we need to keep this within 2 weeks or we're going to lose this person. So I think early days, that was something we experienced a lot. Some of our clients are a bit bigger now where they have their own internal teams. But, same goes for those. I think is just more of a partnership, less of a kind of on paper relationship, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's really cool that since you do focus on smaller companies, you have that expertise in that, like what those companies need. And so you can really like help them right away rather than having to do what I'm guessing so much research into like, how do your operations work? You're probably like, oh, actually, like this is what we've seen at other companies. Is this right? Is that like what happens?
Yes. And I mean, if you're a recruiting firm that partners with Dell, for example, like you're recruiting people and you're telling them the same thing over and over. Like, this is the company we're representing. You've heard of Dell. I don't need to tell you what Dell is. Whereas a smaller company, like, when they partner with us, in a lot of ways, like we'll talk to their marketing departments because we're kind of serving as marketing for them to hire people, but also to kind of just grow their presence as a brand, like, kind of spread the word on what they're trying to do. So it is more fun, but it is more challenging for us is like representing 3 or 4 companies. Like our recruiters really have to be able to know the ins and outs of the companies we work with and be able to kind of, pitch that company to candidates and why we feel like it could be a good fit, but also answer all the questions that come along with the startup and, what their funding situation is, what their team's like, what their culture's like, those types of things.
Yeah. I'm really kind of selfishly curious because I've been reached out to by recruiting agencies before and honestly always been a little bit suspicious because they're like, hey, we've got like this hyper growth healthcare startup. You want to join or something? I know there's usually more information there, but I want to know like for candidates who get emails like that or get reached out to, why should they consider, working with your agency or working with that recruiter?
That's such a tough one. I think here's some keys. Like look for if it says hi, first name, comma, indent, and it looks like a template, it probably is. So I think you just want to be cognizant of like, are you getting this message from someone that like looked at your profile and maybe, specified like, hey, I saw you went to this college. I went to that college too. Whatever it is, it could be something silly like, that you guys both are endorsed for basketball and like you have that in common.
Yeah.
But, I think look for recruiters that really kind of customize their messaging to you. And sometimes that indicates they're more specialized. They're more, they aren't clicking reply all and sending messages to 100 people at a time. That's a big thing that we still do. It's a big differentiator, shockingly, is like just actually sending emails to people that you want to send emails to. So yeah, but I honestly, recruiters have this stereotype and they've earned it of like, we're just mass blast, like hitting up everyone, telling you that we have a job that'll pay you $3 million a year and whatever we can do to get you on the phone. And it's unfortunate, but you have to be cognizant of that. But I would look for kind of some things of just, obviously the company they're representing, does it sound up your alley? Is that something, are you interested in healthcare? If so, it might be worth kind of taking the risk, taking the call with them and just seeing what they have to say.
Yeah. I will say, as someone who has been on that other side of like recruiters reaching out to me, if there's a personalized message, I will respond to that. And I will not respond to any of the ones that are really generic. I love when like my LinkedIn bio is kind of silly. I have like things about like how I got started in tech, like playing Neopets, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I've had recruiters be like, oh my God, I used to play Neopets. And or like I put in there like, send me a pun or something. And I've had a recruiter send me like a really corny joke. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, thank you for personalizing this. Like, I'm not interested in a job, but like, I will respond to you and like help you however I can. Cause usually I'm like, what kind of person are you looking for? Like, let me look at my network and see if anyone could fit those specifications. Yes, I very much appreciate that.
And that's awesome. Yeah. And I mean, I talked to a infrastructure site reliability engineer, I think it was 2 days ago. And, he had clicked open a new ops and he received, I think it was 125 emails in the first like 12 hours of him doing that.
Oh my God.
God knows why he replied to us. I mean, I'd hope to believe that it's because we customized it all and we said something that caught his attention. But yeah, it's unfortunately, I think, like, especially on LinkedIn and other channels, like it's becoming more and more saturated with recruiters sending out these kind of mass emails. And I think that's where, yeah, as a recruit, I would just, like you said, pay attention to the little things. That's the kind of recruiter you want to work with anyways. But it also, if they work at Google and that's something you're excited about, then it probably doesn't matter if they sent you a custom message or not. You're going to want to reply.
Yeah.
That would be my suggestion there is like, take it with a grain of salt, but really look for the ones that customize things to you. I think those are the special ones.
Yeah, I love that. So when candidates do get these emails from recruiting agencies, let's say they say, okay, yes, like I'm interested in talking with you. Can you actually walk me through what that process usually looks like for anyone who maybe has gotten those and never responded to those kind of recruiters?
Yes. So, I mean, it would start with probably if, recruiters are going to shoot to get that 15-minute call with you just to be able to kind of share with you the company info and things like that. Usually they're a little reluctant to send you that info before you talk because you could kind of go on the website, apply to the job, and then the recruiter doesn't get credit for that. So if you've noticed why like recruiters seem to be holding names hostage, that can be why. Is that they're terrified that you're going to like be like, oh, this sounds great. And now I'm going to go apply online and, kind of remove you from the process. So I think recruiters, they'll do a 15-minute call. Really, it's more so like kind of sharing with you about the company, about the role, and then trying to understand, do you have the key requirements? So LinkedIn recruiting, for example, like people don't always have a fully updated page. So like, I don't know if you're using React on the front end or if you're using Vue.js on the front, I don't know, but I can see you're a full stack engineer. So I'm guessing you're using JavaScript on the front end. I just might not know what library. So that's where that call kind of cements that. And then they can better fit you to the roles that they're recruiting for. So maybe they have a couple other roles that might be more applicable than the one they reached out about. So I think that's the benefit of taking a call is you might find out about opportunities that, for us, we represent a lot of smaller companies and they're probably not ones you've heard of. They might have just gotten a big round of funding. So you might hear about them in 6 months, but you might not have heard of them yet. So I think that's where, sometimes it's worth taking a call just to kind of hear out the options. But from there, it's kind of like, we get your information, get your resume, things like that, and see if you want us to submit your information to the company. If you give us the green light, then we kind of go from there with your info and we'll kind of go with your resume, LinkedIn, all portfolio if you're a designer and present that info to the company. Okay. And then the rest is really just kind of navigating the interview steps. Like it's a lot of scheduling, as you'd imagine, like, as a software engineer, as you know, like the demand is so high for tech and product talent out there that, we have to work with our clients to get them to move quickly and hit on the right things and make sure you have all your questions answered. And then you get to an offer stage. And that's also where a recruiter would kind of help with like the negotiation, where if you want more money, but you don't want to, create bad blood by like coming back and asking for 50K more, like the recruiter can kind of be the middleman woman to help kind of navigate that awkward situation at times.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah, I think that lays it out nicely and also very interesting about what you said with how like if you like go around the recruiter and go apply online that they don't get credit for it. I never really thought about that because I'm definitely like that person who's like, all right, let's look up these context clues in Google and see what company they're talking about because I don't want to hop on a 15-minute call all the time. But I definitely like respect that and understand the value in that for the recruitment side.
I think if you're busy enough and you ask, I think most, depending on the recruiter, we've honestly started sharing the names of our clients like more frequently, just because, the problem about that is like if I send you one of our clients and that role isn't actually a fit, then you're just kind of like, okay, this doesn't fit me, no thanks, and then I lose you. Whereas like I have 3 other companies that we work with that might be a good fit. So like I'm trying to figure out as a recruiter, like should I send all 4 of them to you? do I send you 4 job descriptions, 4 company informations, and it ends up stacking up your email or your LinkedIn. So recruiters are kind of being selective with how much we badger you, but also like trying to obviously get your attention and
Yeah,
hopefully not,
that makes
you
sense.
going and applying on the role. Though I think that's just like a calculated risk you have to take.
Yeah, yeah.
And most
No,
recruits
I
are
hope this
kind,
is
like they respect that.
yeah, and I hope this is like building empathy for, the audience, building empathy for those recruiters who are reaching out and trying to like match you with jobs. I have interviewed at least one other recruiter before, and like just hearing what that's like and what like finding the perfect candidate really entails is so important. And especially like when you're on the other side of that and you're getting badgered or you're like just trying to find a job, I feel like sometimes it's hard to have that empathy for the recruiter, but I totally understand. That makes a lot of
And they
sense.
don't all deserve it, to be fair. I guess all humans
Yeah.
might deserve it, but like, you're recruiting for Dell. It's or a big company. It's a volume game. Like the recruiter's trying to get 10 candidates over, knowing that like on average, every 10 resumes they send to Dell, they hire one person. Whereas like
Yeah.
for a company like ours, like we're so selective on the quality side that we're going to be, I don't know, we're not looking to just get 10 replies and send those first 10 over. So, just reply to people like us and not the, big recruiters.
Only reply to aim for
Yes.
hire. I hope everyone understood that.
Exactly.
No, I appreciate the honesty though, because that's really important. And yeah, I hope people seeking jobs understand that better, understand the whole process. I guess I kind of want to switch gears into startups. So I was explaining to you offline how I feel like as someone who's never worked for a startup, I don't really fully understand, the benefits or like why I should want to work at a startup. And you own a startup, so I would love to talk to you about that. So why should candidates consider working at startups?
Yeah, as an owner of one, and then as a recruiter or recruiting company that works with a lot of them, there can be a very long-winded answer here. I think to summarize or to keep it like straight to the point, are you a generalist? Are you somebody that considers yourself kind of like a jack of all trades, or maybe are you interested in being someone that can have their hands in a lot of different projects and a lot of different initiatives? Do people describe you as a Swiss Army knife? Do people describe you as someone that kind of like loses excitement or attention to one thing quickly because you get bored and you want to go find another initiative? Like, those are kind of some of the personality traits that would identify with the startup environment. Whereas bigger companies tend to like the specialists. They like the people that are going to follow the structure, follow the letter of the law. Whereas, startups tend to be environments where it's smaller groups. You have to trust that everyone there self-motivated, is going to be taking ownership, is going to be kind of like looking to move up in their career or looking to kind of take risks. And, I think the other thing of why maybe candidates should consider it is, it is a very connected, exciting environment where you're relying on a small group of other individuals that are like-minded to kind of try to achieve something bigger, right? So I think all those traits, you don't have to have all of them or any of them. I mean, I think, people fall into startups sometimes and end up thriving because they kind of end up finding their own path. But disruption, people who like the idea of the underdog story, like I think those people do well in a startup environment. So I would strongly suggest it, but startups aren't for everyone. I mean, there's not, especially if you're fresh out of college and maybe you're uncertain of how things are going to be, there is a lot of ambiguity in startup life. So you kind of have to be one of those types of people that's willing to take on a challenge, or that likes going into an environment that you have no idea what it's going to look like the next day.
Yeah. You mentioned how it can be good for career growth, and maybe this is just like a limiting belief of mine, and so I would love to hear your thoughts on this. But in my mind, I think that, well-established companies or like bigger companies, they usually have a really good process for helping you move up in your career, or they have so many positions that it is like, oh yeah, you can go from a senior dev to a lead dev and principal, whatever. In my mind, startups don't really have that structure, and so there is less opportunity to move up. Is that wrong? Like what does that career growth really look like?
Yeah, in a startup, the beauty is, as you mentioned, I mean, there's, let's call it 20, 30 people in the company. In the early stages of a company, whether you're a manager, director, VP, or an intern, you're all kind of like hands in doing as much as you can. But if that startup hits, whether it's funding or the company creates a product that ends up becoming very successful, you're going to see the growth trajectory go from 20 to maybe 50, 100 people in a matter of a year or two. And if you were one of the original OG software developers, then all of a sudden you might be in position now to move into being a lead engineer or even being a manager, so, and I think that's where like in a matter of a year, you can make a fast movement like that versus at a bigger company, it's going to be more based on your tenure. Like, have you done your 4 years? Now you can move into senior engineer number 4. And then after a year, you move into senior engineer number 5. I think that's where the attraction is for a startup is like, you just don't know what you're going to get. And there's risk associated with it. But yes, it's really when you like hit big, that's where like all of a sudden you start hiring, and hopefully you're hiring below you. So you're going to continue to kind of move up the chain and get new responsibilities.
Okay. So. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't really thought about that because I think like, yes, you can join startups at the very beginning. I have a friend who just joined a startup and he's like, I'm employee number 6. I'm like, what? Like, that's insane to me. I'm like employee number like 10,000 right now. So that's insane. Yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about like joining, right at the beginning. And then as it grows, you do get those opportunities to move up because you're the one who kind of knows how everything works and you were there building it from the beginning.
Right. And I think, to join a company, like to be the first 10, I mean, that is like a different risk tolerance. I think that's, obviously a company like that isn't going to, I guess depending on their funding situation, but are they going to be able to pay you kind of what you are in the market, or are they going to give you a lot of stock options and hope that one day the stock options will be worth money, which is a huge risk. So I think there's all these different stages of startups, which kind of makes it a bit easier to determine like how risky it is, but also the reward of like, does it have the same type of reward on the career mobility? Because as an engineer at a startup, you will be doing front end, back end, full stack, DevOps, cloud, data engineering, QA. You're gonna get a little bit of everything. So it's a fun thing because you might discover that you freaking love data engineering, but at the same time, like there's not going to be someone over your shoulder kind of instructing you what to do.
Yeah.
So that's why I think a lot of companies tend to value someone that's been in a startup. Even if they're a big company, because they're like, wow, this person's worn different hats. They know what it takes to, whatever it takes to win kind of mentality. Like they're going to have those abilities, those skills. Gotcha.
You mentioned the money aspect, which I think is also another thing that I think of when I think of startups, where I'm like, oh, startups just like don't pay as much. But that's not true. I know there's a lot of different kinds of startups. So I'm actually wondering whether you have just like personal experience knowing about this, or any resources that people can use to better understand how to figure out what the right startup is for you, and like especially that money part,
And you're spot on with like, there isn't like a letter of the law way it goes. I think, going to a company's Crunchbase or going to like their LinkedIn page, and you can click their abouts, and usually there's like a tab on funding or, whether it's venture capital or private equity funding. And it's not always funny. Some companies are just profitable and that's how they grow. So, those are the ones that are profitable, are a little more stable because like they're bringing in their own revenue, but they usually aren't growing at the trajectory that a funded company would. And then in funding, I think really Googling like, as simple as Googling like tech, software funding, but also looking at like local venture capital groups, so if you're in Denver, if you're in Austin, like kind of getting a feel for who are the notable VCs in town. And that way you can kind of click on all the companies they're invested in. And that might give you a level of, well, this VC's, invested in 10 companies over the last 2 years and 8 of them went, IPO. So like, I'm going to have a little more credibility, or that VC is going to have a little more credibility with me, if I'm joining a company that they're invested in, because it sounds like they know what they're doing. Whereas, if it's by some investor that you've never heard of, or you can't find anything online, like those are a little more sketch. So you kind of want to be cognizant of those. But yeah, Crunchbase is probably the best place. And then, the funding all comes in stages, right? Like you get the early stages and then A, B, C, D, and then it just alphabetically goes. The later the funding round, like the less valuable the stock options are. because the stock's been diluted by all the investments by these private equity groups and VCs. But in exchange for all that cash they're giving the company can pay you more. So if they're later in the funding stage, they more likely are able to pay you more of what the market is, or maybe even above what the market is. But the stock options aren't going to be as valuable as they were, when the company was really small. So that's the catch-22 with your friend that was employee number 6, is like, he didn't give him as much cash, but his stock options could be worth, millions someday, which more power to him if it works out. But yeah, I think there's some interesting things on Series A, Series B, and Series C funded tech companies, and where that there's a drop off of 70% of companies that get their Series A funding actually make it to Series B. And then from Series B to Series C, it just keeps dropping in percentages. So you just kind of want to, I think, based off that data, kind of make an educated guess on, is it worth the risk there?
Yeah. It feels like it very much depends on what you're looking for a company and, what kind of risk you're willing to take. It's almost like talking about crypto and stuff. It's like, how much risk are you willing to take with this company?
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And thank you for breaking that down a lot, because I think startups always confuse me.
To this day, they still confuse me too, and how stock options work. And, they can give you 1 million stock options, but if it's out of 1 trillion stock options, then the number of stock options don't matter. It's the percentage that stock option makes up of all the rest is really kind of how you can better value it. So it's a lot of tricky, misleading sometimes stuff. So yeah, I guess my suggestion is talk to somebody who understands, when you're recruiting with a startup, try to understand it better and do your own research. I'm sure there's a lot of YouTube videos out there that kind of help go through those stages.
Yeah, absolutely. So when someone is considering joining a startup, you from the recruitment side, what really makes a candidate stand out to these startups?
I think to us, and also to a company when you're interviewing, and frankly, this probably goes if you're interviewing with a small company or a large company, is you don't want to just vaguely describe your skill set. And sometimes this is uncomfortable because people don't some people maybe do like bragging about themselves, others don't. And, whether it's because you're humble or you're just not sure how to articulate why you think you might be a good candidate for the role. To me, the standout has always been instead of being I'm good at this or I'm decent at that, try to give examples of when you utilize that skill. Mm-hmm. So I always, for software engineers, whether your background's only internships or if you've worked a year or two, you want to try to think about what challenges is this company facing. They have 50 people. From what I can tell from the job description, it looks like they're moving things into containers in the cloud and they're shifting from on-prem to AWS. How can I think of something I've done that's translatable to that challenge? And then maybe give an example, especially for startups, they want to hear about examples of how you handled ambiguity. Did you take ownership, or did you take an opportunity to kind of fix something or provide a solution on your own? They look for kind of that personality type that's interested in doing those types of things.
Okay. Very self-motivated, looking for opportunities to solve stuff. Because you mentioned how there's 20 employees, you kind of got to do everything.
Right. And not all startups are the same. Some of them, maybe they like people that are more chill versus ones that are I want to fix everything and do all that. That's not always the right answer. I think you want to do your research on whoever you're interviewing with to kind of understand what their background's like, if you have any similarities, anything in common. But yes, I think ultimately the startups do like to hear about specific examples. And, if you're a fresh out, you might not have a lot of examples. So maybe you got to find a way to compare it to a project you dealt with in college or something in your GitHub that you created because you thought it would provide a solution to a problem. That's what I would encourage is instead of just answering, I took a class in that language, give some examples of how you've used Java to fix something.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that really applies to any company, not even just startups. It's how do you quantify the things that you've done and relate your experience to what that company's looking for? Yeah, that's fantastic. So with then interviewing, we've kind of done like the difference between big companies, small companies. When you interview, are there any differences you would expect when you're interviewing with a startup versus a bigger company like Google, Amazon, et cetera?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot there, and I think there's a lot kind of published on the FANG interviews, and I think there's usually probably more bureaucracy. There's more levels and stages of interviews that you kind of have to get
Yeah.
through. Whereas a smaller company, like your first interview might be with the CTO. It's that's how polar opposite they can be. But at the same time, obviously they're both trying to make the right hire. They're both trying to find somebody that they can resonate with, that they, respect, has the skills to join their team. So, as far as differences go and how you'd interview with the two, yeah, I think it's easier with a smaller company, but you should do it for both, which is, whenever you're interviewing with somebody, understand who you're interviewing with. Look at their LinkedIn, do some internet stalking. Not that I promote that, but I'm a recruiter, so it's kind of my job. You gotta, kind of try to see, what they're about. Like, are they in Austin? Are they in some other state? Where are they from? Where do they go to school? Like, how did they get to where they are in their career? You kind of want to have these things in your back pocket when you're interviewing with them, because for one, enables you in interviews. It is always awkward. It is awkward for the interviewer. It is awkward for the interviewee. So like have something in your back pocket that, if worse comes to worse, you hit that first awkward silence, like you feel like you kind of know the person a little bit, and maybe you have a topic or two to bring up that maybe it's not spot on to what you were just talking about in the interview, but we're all human beings. We like to hire people that we can connect with outside of just talking about work. So that would be my suggestion,
Yeah.
whether you're meeting with CTO or a recruiter, like, do a little homework. People appreciate being appreciated. And if you did your homework, it stands out. Like it means a lot to people. That's what I found.
Yeah. I love that. And I must say, as a podcast host, it is very easy to find information about people. Like, oh, I wasn't going to admit this, but I know you played basketball in college, and I found a video of you playing
Oh no.
basketball in college. I think you posted it. So, like, it exists in the world. But I was like, oh, man, like, he's pretty good at basketball, better than I've ever been.
I think it has like 2 or 3. Oh, definitely, it might have like 5 or 6 views now, but it's mostly dad,
7. You're
mom.
at 7 now.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I'm moving up the food chain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
I'm just
welcome.
short of trending, but yeah, it was kind of something where they had made it for us at college, and I was like, one day I'm gonna have children, and they're not gonna believe me when I say I was decent at something, so I got this to prove it.
Yeah, literally, you just Google your name and it pops up, just letting you know. But see, that would be a great thing in an interview. Like, this is an interview where be like awkward silence, like, "Oh, I heard you play basketball."
There you go.
That kind of
Watch the game
thing.
last night, yeah, and all of a sudden it's a conversation. It is not an interview, and it probably helps you relax a little bit. It helps both parties relax. So whether it's over video, in person, on a phone call, I've just always found that such a little thing. Like it's just really takes 5 minutes to just Google someone's name and click on a couple links. But like you said,
Yeah.
and I'm sure when you're meeting with new people, yeah, it's got to be something to just like look into their background.
Yeah. And they feel like the interviewer then feels seen. They know that like you genuinely care about this interview, you care about getting this position, you care about the person on the other end, and like that's all you want from someone you're going to hire. Like you can kind of teach them everything, but like you want someone you can work with, someone you can relate to, all that.
Exactly. You checked LinkedIn. We had a mutual connection that happened to work for me. Like, yeah, that just brought down any walls I had of like being able to talk openly and freely and just like, just knowing someone in common, that's another example of something you could bring up on a call. It's like, oh, I saw we're both connected to Dave. Like Dave's an awesome guy, isn't he? Boom.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love this advice. And I actually have another question about advice. Coincidentally, didn't do that on purpose. Anyway, so right now there's been a lot of layoffs in the tech industry. And so I was wondering if you have any advice for people who are looking for jobs in tech now. What advice would you give to them when so many people are, laying people off or doing hiring freezes, stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a bit scary. I think if you look at generations that came out in 2008, and during that type of situation, or even, people that graduated during COVID. And I can't even imagine coming out of college and just not really knowing, not getting to meet with people and interview in person, so I think in this case, still to be determined, obviously, of what's going to happen the next 6 to 12 months, but if you're wanting to hedge your bets a bit, you're starting to kind of think of, what industries in tech specifically would survive or even maybe thrive during, recessions, so those recession proof type industries. I'm not sure this is universally going to be right, but obviously like the healthcare space, like food, essentials, transportation to a degree, though with the cost of gas, that's a whole different topic, or cost of oil. Renewables, what is the government going to be investing in? Biotech with what's going on with COVID and other viruses that, monkeypox or whatever. So I mean, there seems like an endless list of problems that we're kind of dealing with day to day. But I think those are industries where if you can find, healthcare tech companies, if you can find agriculture tech, maybe renewable software, renewable technologies, hardware, IoT type stuff, those could be considered a little safer than other industries, though. When it comes to startups, that's where you're going to want to do your homework on how much funding do they have, what's their runway. So understanding, how long would that funding last them at the current rate that they're spending that money? Is their runway 4 years? And in that case, it's like, whoa, well, we'll be well out of whatever recession might come in 4 years, or you'd think. Whereas if they're like, well, we're about to run out of money and we need to figure out what the next funding situation is, I don't know if they'll admit that to you, but if you can do your research and be like, okay, well, numbers say that they might be lower on funding. And if they're hiring, that's usually an indication that they're in decent shape. Some companies are just out of control and they hire even when they're not doing well, which I would, again, just research before you make such a big decision as like joining a company.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say the startups are a little different because even if they're in an industry that won't thrive during, recessions, they might have enough funding where it doesn't matter. An investor is like, hey, this is an opportunity for us to hire a lot of talent and grow this product over the next 2 years. I'm going to give you $100 million so you don't even have to worry about, you don't have to worry about making money or selling your product at all. I just want you to get it created and build out a team. So That's where it's hard to be like, this space will be okay, this space won't. But I would just I'd pay attention, keep an ear to the ground on like these layoffs, the back to office stuff. Are these California compensation packages that, a lot of Silicon Valley's been offering to fully remote employees? Are they going to stop doing that? Because are they going to start asking people to come back to the office? Like there's just a lot of factors there that you want to be in the know about.
Yeah. Research should be done. That makes a lot of sense. I feel like it really depends on the company, because I actually had someone ask me this question recently, someone who was looking to get into tech. And I was like, personally, like I haven't felt it at my company. Like nothing's happened, but I have like seen that happening on LinkedIn and Twitter, people getting laid off and stuff. There's also, I actually found this yesterday when I was researching for this. There's this website called layoffs.fyi that I found really interesting, intriguing, where they have all the layoffs in tech that have happened since the beginning of the pandemic. There's like over 100,000 people who've been laid off, which I was like, wow, I just like didn't realize that. So that's a website to check out.
Well, and we all get stuck in our own little box of, what's going on in our friend group or even in our city. Whereas like, yeah, I think being aware of layoffs that are going on all over the US or the world, I mean, it's good to be knowledgeable of that, especially if you're looking for a job or if you're like worried that your job might get. That's where I think it's worth spending the time to try to understand, local companies or any companies that are posting jobs right now. That's usually a good sign that they're in a position to be hiring versus firing. But yeah, in the tech space, it is highly volatile. It's like kind of like you were talking about crypto, and it's sometimes there's a lot of ups, there's a lot of downs, there's a lot of sideways. It's just it's kind of like how you can battle that.
Yeah, you just never know. Okay, so this is awesome. I have one final question, which I ask in every episode, because it's about like, technologists always growing, learning new skills, all that. So what is one skill that you're currently working on, Chase?
skill I'm working on. How
Anything.
much
It could be
time do you
work related or
have?
not.
Um,
Just one.
um, I think the one of the greatest challenges I battle as like a younger business owner is upgrading my knowledge and skills on how to manage, how to lead, how to follow a stricter schedule and be more cognizant of my time. But that's general. More
Yeah.
specific, it's kind of like being able to more quickly analyze a situation and make quicker decisions based on that. I think that's something my brother and I mean, we collectively, as the two founders, we have collectively 8 years of work experience, 9 years of work experience. Now we played college sports. We played basketball growing up. We've had jobs through high school, college. So it's like, we're maybe a little more experienced than we look, but that's something, as maybe a young engineer or someone up and coming in their career, people are going to look at you a certain way because of, the number of years you've worked. So trying to upgrade that, trying to kind of find different ways to improve ourselves as leaders and managers. I think that's probably my greatest challenge right now that I'm trying to work on.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Cool. So that is all. Those are all the questions I have for you. Thank you so much, Chase, for being on the show. If anyone would like to connect with you, Chase's LinkedIn and company website will be linked in the show notes, as well as any resources that we mentioned today. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And I'll see you next time where we'll continue blossoming together.